Okay, it's 5:30. I'm going to call this to order, beginning with roll call.
Nicole Villanueva.
Stork, present.
Margaret Beck.
Deanna Thoman.
Jordan Sellergren.
Andrew Lewis.
Christina Reynolds.
Frank Wagner.
All right. Item C, the public discussion of anything that is not on the agenda. And is there anybody here that would like to speak? Not at the moment? All right. So I'm going to move on to item D, certificate of appropriateness for 813 Rundell Street.
Carl Brown has just arrived. Okay, 813 Rundell Street is in the Dearborn Street Conservation District. There you go. Here's the map. It's just right on the edge. It's a contributing building. It's a little hard to see from the front, so I'll show you some other images. This is basically a brick house with a front-facing gable with lap siding. Here is the front entryway, California window, recessed entry. Because this project is all about the roof, I thought we'd talk about the roof just a little bit here. As you can see, this is an aerial image. You can faintly see some lines in here. We have a ridge, this is the ridge for the main hip roof, and a hip roof is a roof that slopes in all four directions, at least when all four directions are visible. A gable roof slopes in two directions. So this kind of shows you the diagram. This ranch house has a main hip roof here with the ridge and the slopes, and then it has a gable roof on the front with the ridge and its slopes. The project is about the screened-in porch, which was on the back, and it was originally built as part of the house, and it has effectively a flat roof, very, very low slope roof, and it's been causing deterioration from water. So the project is to replace that flat roof with another a gable roof. It would be at the same slope as all of the other roofs on the house as well. Here's an image of the south side of that screen porch. One thing to note is here you have the eave line or the soffit, the under edge of the roof on the main roof of the house. The eave line for the screen porch is actually down here. So it steps down a little bit. There's a fascia board around the top of the wall in both cases. Another part of the project is actually just going to raise that to match the rest of the house so that that eave line will just continue the rest of the house. And in our guidelines, when we have additions, we talk about doing that kind of thing too, continuing the horizontal lines on the house. It was just one of those things where they could make that change or not as they wished, and an architect was involved, and so they determined that they would go ahead and raise that. Here's the image of the northwest corner, and you can see how some of that rain coming down is helping to deteriorate the fascia, the soffit. It basically bounces off the brick and concrete and onto the wood here. You can also see that, this is the slope of the roof. It does change a little bit from here to here, but that's the entire slope of the roof, so it's a really low slope. The guidelines that are associated with this project are from Section 4.7, Mass and Roof Lines. We have preserving the historic trim, such as crown molding, skirt and frieze boards. In this case, we have a, 1950s ranch house. The wood might be a good wood and it might not be. Replacing it with wood to match, which is what they propose to do, would be the recommendation. There's also then preserving the original roof pitches and spans, which the entire point of this project is to not do that. So there is an exception in this section available to all properties in all districts. Basically, minor changes to the roof pitch to address drainage can be done on a case-by-case basis. And the commission would approve that as an exception to the guidelines because it was necessary here in order to solve a drainage issue. And then otherwise, the roof itself, what they propose to do, fits in with our guidelines to match roof pitches and roof types and things like that. For instance, this house has a hip roof as the main roof. The decision could be made to make this new porch roof be a hip roof. But because of the fact that the front-facing projection is a gable roof, that was the recommendation by staff, is to actually make the screen porch have a gable roof as well. So here we have a straight-on shot of the existing condition. And here is a drawing of the new situation. So it'll have asphalt shingles to match the new gable basically in the front with the lap siding, raising the eave, and soffit to match what's on the main house instead. And then this project will also replace the battens and the screens on the screen porch. Here's a roof plan showing that change. And the recommended motion is to approve the project as presented in the application through the use of an exception to the guidelines.
All right. Now is when I call for a motion, and then commission discussion takes place after.
Yeah, you could also ask if anybody has any questions.
Oh, right.
Or if anybody from, we don't have any representatives here, but you could also ask if there are any people who want to talk about the project.
Sure. Do we have any clarifying questions from the commission?
I did.
Yep.
Jessica, you mentioned that that fascia board was going to line up with the roof line or whatever. But they didn't have to do that? Was that because the whole project's an exception or because?
They don't have to do that because they can match the existing conditions. So they could leave it where it is. They could do it because they're changing the roof anyway, and then it would follow the guidelines and match. So that's why they could go in either direction with that particular detail. And it's this, raising this part here to match that. The fascia board or freeze board here, basically you have the same thing here and it'll just be a little bit taller because it's a little bit lower.
It would probably raise the elevation of the room.
Inside, there's not a ceiling, so they could, yeah.
It'll look nice on the outside.
I think so too.
Okay, do we have a motion? If there's-
Wagner moved to approve a certificate of appropriateness for the project at 813 Rundell Street as presented in the application and through the use of an exception to the guidelines.
Great. Do we have commission discussion?
A second?
A second, I'm sorry.
Bowman seconds.
All right, now on to discussion. If any?
Okay.
All right, so let us vote on the motion. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Great. All right. Number 2, 320 East College Street.
Okay, 320 East College Street is a local historic landmark. It's in the Iowa City Downtown Historic District, and the Downtown Historic District, as we remember, is only a National Register Historic District. So we're reviewing this project because it's also a local landmark. It is the Trinity Episcopal Church, shown here on the corner of College and Gilbert. Here is the south elevation of the historic church, built in the 1870s. Here's just another view of it. The church has had several projects. There have been some sign projects. There have been some roofing projects. There was a big project that replaced the entire foundation and added some accessibility in these bump outs. This is a more modern addition as well. There is a parish hall back along the alley that was, I think, built in the 40s or so, and it is part of the National Register listed property. And then there's a 1970s building along the west side as well. The current project is to replace the sign. I believe that this is also a modern sign, but it's a wood sign. Here's an image of it. And so sign guidelines, we don't have any specific guidelines really about signs in our handbook. We review them against the Secretary of the Interior standards directly. If it was a downtown kind of business sign, then we would review it against the Iowa City Downtown District Sign Guidelines, which I think the commission, or at least preservationists, were consulted when that was developed. So it follows the Secretary of the Interior standards. This is a monument sign, so it's not like that. So what we are talking about here, though, is not only the sign design, but the material. And so we do have a section in the guidelines about wood, and wood recommends substituting a material in place of wood only if the substitute material retains the appearance and function of the original wood, and that substitute material must be durable, accept paint, and be approved by the commission. It disallows substituting a material that does not retain the appearance, function, and paintability of wood. For the Secretary of the Interior standards, I mean, the basic standards related to this project are that, say, exterior alterations shall not destroy historic materials that characterize the property. The existing sign is not a historic sign. The sign will be placed in the yard near at least, where the existing sign is, so there won't be any historic materials that will be damaged. The new work shall be differentiated from the old and shall be compatible with the massing, size, scale, and architectural features to protect the historic integrity of the property. One of the things that we would look at for a monument sign is whether or not that sign speaks to or works with the architecture. And so that would satisfy Standard 9. Standard 10, adjacent new construction or related shall be undertaken in a manner that if removed in the future, the essential form and integrity of the historic property would be unimpaired, which again, I would assume, given the location and installation, that would be satisfied as well. So here is a site plan. The church building, the main historic part, this is the more recent addition, and the parish hall. It's an interesting site plan, but it does show that we, to meet the zoning code and the sign permit application that goes with that, we do have to set back 30 feet on each direction from the corner because it's a certain height, and that's part of the code, so I don't know exactly what that height is, but the sign's been reviewed by them so that they know it can be approved. The new sign will be located here. This is the design for the new sign, so it'll have posts similar to the existing ones, and then there will be this board that is suspended with several things that Trinity already has on their signage. So the application was submitted to make the signboard itself out of HDU, which is a high-density urethane, and my research took me to at least these two main web pages that talked about the fact that it's actually become an industry standard for carved signs because it's not going to deteriorate in the weather. It is paintable and it can be worked like wood. The applicant submitted this image and also a statement that basically talked about the fact that this sign uses the same material, and it's being installed in a historic district in Washington, D.C., right outside of National Park Service buildings. And so the basic premise is if it's good enough for them, it would be good enough for us. However, given the research, regardless of that, staff would agree that this, at least for a monument sign, that the HDU material would be an appropriate material to approve. If you want to just approve it for this project, then you would just approve this project. If you are interested in approving it basically for signs like this as an appropriate commission-approved material, I'd also want you to make a motion and vote on that. And that would be up to you. So currently, I have the motion for the project, which is just to approve a certificate of appropriateness for the project of 320 East College Street as presented in the application. And then if you want to approve the use of the high-density urethane, this would be the motion for that too. And that's something where, I mean, you can think about it. You can do it in the future, you can do it now, or not do it. It's entirely up to you.
All right, do we have clarifying questions?
Can we go back to the image of the, yes, this? I'm just curious, and maybe this should be part of the discussion, but I'm curious, Jessica, if you know, is that piece painted right now?
It is.
Okay, and it looks like it's a high gloss paint. I feel like I'm seeing a reflection.
Oh, part of it is also, I think that there is some like reflection in the photograph/camera lens. I don't think all of that is, yeah, I don't think it's just that we have a super glossy paint here. I think this has something to do, because I see it over in here as well.
Okay, yeah, you're right. Okay, I was just concerned. I know when I was flipping through the agenda and I first saw this, I thought that was metal.
I did
with
too,
like a
yeah.
high sheen. So I just,
And it might be, I mean, it is, they are going to paint it red, and so it is possible that they would use a high gloss paint. I mean, that does exist.
So you're pretty sure it's not an AI image, that it's real?
Given the contractor who submitted it to me, I'm sure.
All right. Do we have a motion?
Brown moved to approve a certificate of appropriateness for the project at 320 East College Street as presented in the application.
Stork seconds the motion.
Would anybody like to move the additional,
You could just do the first one for now.
just the first one? Okay, commission discussion? Frank, do you have anything to say about it? How do you feel about the material?
I've not ever seen it before. There was the only other material that's wood material is that Akoya and Tricoya stuff that I maybe talked about once. It's wood that has been chemically altered never to rot.
Oh.
But
We're
This is
asking the
fine.
man who brought in pieces of wood for everybody today.
it smells nice.
Asking him first.
I'm okay with this. I suppose I would say let's not move for the second one.
Oh, yeah.
Just until we wait and see, maybe let's let the sign stand for a year and see what it
That's
looks
a good
like.
idea.
And I'm curious too, Jessica, how many applications do you get for signs? Is it often?
You know, I get 2 or 3 a year, but, you know, monument signs, I mean, frankly, it's going to be churches, maybe a random business,
Space
Greek
One.
houses, you know, there's not going to be a lot of monument signs. Though we will have one, there will be another one coming up soonish, but I don't think they want to use wood.
Did Public Space One have his,
I can't remember. They might have.
okay. I can't remember either.
Would we already add it to the agenda for 1 year from now? 'Cause I don't
know that I can remember that, Carl.
think I remember a year from now that, oh, hey, we wanted to talk about
So
that.
maybe next time it comes up,
Then it's
Yeah.
presented
Then we'll
again.
then we'll, yeah, we,
Very good.
Yeah.
all right.
I don't, but wait, you still have a motion on the table.
Yes.
Okay, would somebody like to read the additional motion?
No,
Sounds like we're not
you should
gonna
just
do the
finish
additional motion
Okay,
for now.
okay, so now we
vote
vote. All
and
right.
stuff like that.
All right, let's vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Great. Okay, item E, request comment on a proposal at 431 South Summit Street. And our Commissioner Nicole will have to recuse herself. Thank you, Nicole.
Okay, this house is in the Summit Street Historic District, as you can see right here. This is a front image of the house. We know that this house was an Italianate house originally, and it was remodeled in the 1930s by a local architect that's named and known. Maybe after a fire. It's also pretty obvious to me that the rear portion of this house was an addition at some point in time. Just to give you an idea, potentially, this type of Italianate house, if you look at the front portion and kind of the rhythm of windows, it could have been something like this, wide eave overhang. Here's another one. Basically, it would have likely had a really wide eave that probably would have had an internal gutter in it. It would have had brackets. This is 618 East Davenport. It's a local landmark. It happens to have a gable front roof. I don't really get that from 431. I think that it was probably more like the really, really low-pitched hip roof. But anyway, there are a few types. So the overall project is to add an addition to the back of the house. And during design review of the project, it became apparent that we had one guideline that we weren't meeting. And it's a guideline that really impacts even the location of the addition. And so prior to having the architect work on any design revisions that might be needed, we wanted to come to the commission to determine whether or not the commission is likely to approve an exception to the guidelines to allow the project to happen. And so I'll go through that. And we won't be making a motion and voting on this, but we really do want to poll the commission to determine whether or not it's likely to be approved one way or the other, or slightly differently, and we can talk about that as we get to it. So currently, we have a dining room and a kitchen in the rear of the house. Part of the applicant's reason for wanting to put the addition behind that is because they want to keep the historic dining room. It has built-ins, it has a plaster cartouche in the ceiling, really nice diagonal floor, stuff like that. The kitchen is very small. You can see the plan here. This is the workable spot. There's a refrigerator here, and then there's numerous, well, this one's a closet, this is the basement, and this is outside. So there's numerous doors that make this end of the kitchen not really usable. Here are some shots. So this is looking at the door situation against the east side of the kitchen. Here's Nicole showing you the size of the kitchen. Here's the dining room itself. And there were a couple other images maybe that were included in the packet, just of the space in general. So the guideline that we're working with is Section 5.1, expansion of the building footprint, recommends that unique setback guidelines exist for Summit Street. And on this street, the rear wall of the primary structure, the house, must not extend deeper than 125 feet from the front street. The purpose of that is, as it says here, the restriction preserves the openness of rear yards. And then it says to refer to the neighborhood district guidelines. The neighborhood district guidelines say on Summit Street only, the rear wall of the primary structures must not extend deeper than 125 feet from the front street. And again, why this exists. So there are a couple interesting things here. One, it is recommended in Section 5.1, it's recommended like most of our guidelines. And the reason why most of our guidelines are recommended is, so we don't have one guideline that contradicts another, because frankly, one recommendation in the guideline might not be the most appropriate way to deal with a specific property. Here in Section 8, there's no recommendation. It's just saying must. The other thing is that there is not a specific documented exception to this guideline. We have a few ways that exceptions happen with the guidelines. One, they're documented, like, for instance, the one that we dealt with the roof just recently. There was one that basically said if there's drainage issues, the commission can decide. We don't have that for this section of the guidelines. Another thing that we can talk about with exceptions is if the guidelines don't talk about it. You know, it's just not something like they're going to do something and we don't cover it in the guidelines. And so maybe some other guidelines lead you towards restricting it, so an exception could be made for some reason related to that. The other third way you can apply an exception to the guidelines is an uncommon situation. And so we have used that. For instance, the guidelines actually disallow attached garages on Summit Street. We've approved an attached garage because of the fact that the lot was too small to add a garage that was not attached to the house. It was physically impossible. And so an exception was made to the guidelines in that case to go against the guideline. So that's basically what we're dealing with here. As part of the application, since the applicant knew about this situation, they submitted some measurements. This is basically a screenshot from the Johnson County Property Information Viewer. We use that. I use it every day, every hour, probably at work. And you can measure from one place to another. I will say that because I do use this every day at work, I know two things about it. One, the shapes that you see there are the roof outlines. So if you have somebody who has a 24-inch soffit, you know, you're seeing that whole size of that roof. You're not seeing the walls. So we do need to take that into consideration. There are other things such as making sure that it aligns properly. You know, I actually went through, because of this, and, well, here. So they also provided some distances of just the backyards, which is also useful, and we can return to this if you would like. And then of the subject property. So I went through and I measured the entire street, and one of the things that you need to do is make sure that your cursor is lined perfectly on the line so that they meld together. I mean, literally, you have to do that to get an accurate measurement. So I went through on each property, and as you can see here, like there are two measurements. I went through, I looked at what their eave overhang might be, you know, from a photo, and tried to come up with basically how far these houses are from the front street. And I also looked at additions and when were additions done. It took a little while. And I came up with the table that I put in the packet. And I've made a visual here. We may not be able to see the top one. 304 South Summit on the corner of Burlington is also green. Green means that it extends past 125 feet. But that was also a historic situation. It was either the house was built that way, or they added on to it basically before 1942. There is one house, this one, 624, and it was actually just built really, really far back on the lot. It's set back a lot further than everybody else. So we have, I did, because I was putting together the memo really quickly, I did have a couple errors in it. And so, for instance, I said that I found, out of the 43 properties, I found 15 that did not follow that guideline. It's actually 14. I cannot find what the 15th one was. I have no idea. There are 6 of them where that happened before 1942. We have another 3, and I had put in the memo 4, so that's where my count was off. Another 3 where they did some kind of addition in the 50s to 70s. We have then 2 of them that were reviewed by the commission. They were reviewed by the commission in the 80s or 90s. We can look on the table to make sure. And that was before we had guidelines. At that point in time, all the projects went to the commission, and the commission themselves reviewed them. The staff didn't do much review, and you would review them against the Secretary of the Interior standards only. So it was just a little different. There was no specific guidelines. But then we have 3 of them that were done currently. And so I thought we would look at those specifically. Just so you know, here's the table that was in the memo, and here's this, so we can return to it if we need to. One of them is 409 South Summit. And at the point in time when their project came up, this was their situation. So they had a historic sleeping porch that somebody had added and extended out further prior to the 1970s. And so their project was enclosing the area below it. So in some case, I don't see that the commission talked about that setback in regard to this project. I don't know why. It wasn't really mentioned in the staff report. So I have no idea why it came up. But they did not extend further than the existing building. This is 519 South Summit. They had this addition that projected 6 feet past this wall. And the project added an addition that removed this, and instead of sticking out 6 feet, it stuck out 12 feet. And I can't find a photo of the final version and didn't have time to go take one. So this is the rendering that was approved. So I suspect that the commission felt strongly that this improved the appearance of the back of this house. I, again, did not see anything except for the fact that they noted, and I'm not sure that this works with my measurements, but they noted that it would only project 4.5 feet into that 125-foot setback. So math-wise, I'm not sure. I think it might have actually been 6, but they said 4.5 feet. This is probably the biggest one, and this is 330 South Summit. This was a project where it was adding on to the back of the house here a one-story bedroom bath for the owner to age in place, and then she wanted a porch that matched. In this particular instance, they took the time, they determined that this house had the biggest yard, and so we'll go back and look, or the biggest lot of all of them in that area, and that even after this happened, they would still have twice as much open space as anyone nearby. And that is entirely the discussion that they had where they approved this addition to extend further into the rear yard. So, for instance, it's right here, and the addition is on it right in this image. So they did have a significant amount of open space. The other thing that I would note, and I frankly didn't read the entire staff report, so I don't know if they mentioned it or not, is when we're thinking of exceptions, for this owner to put an addition on this property, she would have had to put it behind the house. On the north side of the house, there's a historic porte cochere, which is basically like a drive-through drop-off. It has a porch above it, so it's an open underneath with a driveway. And that's what you can see here. So it wasn't possible to add an addition on this side of the house. She had to add it onto the back of the house to have an addition. So that might have been part of their discussion, but they did talk about the size of the lot. So at this point, staff would not recommend approving an addition that extended past this 125 feet, partly because staff doesn't find that it's an uncommon situation, that there's really a limitation. And part of that is because we feel that there's an opportunity to put an addition in this portion of the house instead. So effectively, you could take this dining room space, which is represented by this rectangle, move it outwards. It would have to replace some of the materials in there, of course. It would retain, however, the exterior window on both the north and west sides, and then the extra space could be added to expand the kitchen. So staff would recommend that this would at least allow an addition and better follow the guidelines. And so basically, we have a request for comment for the commission, and we can go back and look at any of this that you want in detail or not, and that's completely up to you. Would the commission consider the use of an exception to the guidelines for an addition to 431 South Summit to extend past the setback limitation on Summit Street? Oh, and I should note, the house is only 1 foot from that limit right now. So to entirely meet the guidelines, they have 1 foot. We have regularly allowed properties to go to 126. So, I mean, feasibly, something of a foot or two is not, it's all the same. Would the commission consider the use of an exception for an addition that extends past the setback limitations less than the proposed 13 feet? If so, what distance could it extend? So, basically, the commission has a role here of providing comment, whether you think that there's an exception that is warranted to allow them to put the addition entirely behind the house, and it is a 14-foot addition, so that's where the 13-foot dimension came up with. If you would not allow that and would want them to work out something that fits within the guidelines, kind of like as staff recommended, or if you think that it might be possible to add on to the house a different distance. You know, the commissioner at one point in time thought 4.5 feet was okay, which might have been 6. I don't know.
Can you go back to the drawing?
Also, we're saying that this would then take us to 138? Is that right? Am I doing?
So, yeah, 138 is where we would be if we approved the entire dimension. Is this what you wanted, Frank?
Yes. What is the square footage roughly of the kitchen addition on the left? Actually, are we okay to be asking questions now?
I was trying to follow that, too.
So it's
What is it, 14?
14 by 18? I don't know. Anybody have
Get your
calculator?
calculator out.
I don't have one.
I have a smartphone.
14 times 18? 252.
215, and then how about the additional, I mean,
The space here is 8 by 15,
120.
120, so less than half. But
But-
there's an existing kitchen as well.
But you're like, so if you, the suggestion basically says, destroy your dining room, right? Because you basically are saying like, you have to remove the part to the left, the one at the left, and also if you're extending your kitchen, you also are destroying the one on the right. So you're kind of, we're saying get rid of that interior, right?
Right, I mean, to be clear, the recommendation is saying put the addition on the south side of the house.
Right.
However that works out.
Because there's no, well,
I mean, I would definitely consider the addition going behind the house, because it does preserve the dining room.
But that's a very long distance.
How
that we're
far is the
extending.
house, though, from the front of the street? Like, how far does this house sit back? You know what I mean? We talked about where the location of some of these houses do sit on the street.
So
Is
we
it
can go back
further
to-
back than some of the other houses? Is it?
Well, so for instance, this is one of the dimensions that they provided, so like right now, they have 54 feet here. It's aligned with the house to the next door. And if we look here, we see that basically they're
They're back pretty far, yeah.
all
of them.
of them are
Line.
approximately
guideline-
aligned.
The guideline is for the backyard, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And the second one was from the neighborhood?
The second one is that.
So we have.
That was a must and not a recommendation.
We have guidelines for additions, And then we have neighborhood district guidelines. And in this case, the guidelines for the addition and new construction also, they always refer to the neighborhood district guidelines for specific things. This specific guideline is actually repeated in both places. It is worded the same. In the additions guidelines, everything is a recommendation.
Gotcha.
Can you go back to the floor plan again?
So the addition would go 13 feet back, and they still have quite a bit of space in the backyard before it hits their garage, right? It's in the back of the house, so you would not see that from the road. It preserves the dining room. The stairs and things like that.
So we're just able to converse right now? is
Yeah.
that right?
Yeah.
Okay. This looks modern to me.
Well, I was going to say the same thing. Also, that the way it jots out that 2
Yes.
feet, 4 inches is sort of contrary to what we usually say about an addition, that it sets back in a foot.
Well, and
That, you're sitting in your dining room and you look out the window and you see the corner of the
It's
house.
set back from the main part of the house, but not that kitchen
Right.
area.
And we have noted that as one of the recommendations in a staff review to be revised.
So that concern is just pushing that wall back to line up with what the dining room would be?
It would, our guidelines would actually have us set in from the corner. In the mass and roof line section, there is a guideline that requires that we retain the corners of the building. And that's so that we can always tell the extent of the original building. It also solves some major roof issues that we've had to deal with as well.
So
So whether or not it is set in from that corner is not actually
Right.
what we're concerned with right now.
Okay,
So
just
my sense is we're being asked to consider, we're being asked to think about if we would be open to an exception.
Exception.
Right?
Yep.
And I guess my mind goes to what would be the reason for that exception? Right?
We
Because
do
then-
have to,
right,
you
'cause
must
then the next
tell
property
that.
owner would say, ooh, I'd like an
Yep.
exception too, right?
Well, I don't think we have a reason right now for an exception.
I agree.
I mean, I would say that this is opening floodgates for, there's no limitations on making exceptions
How many-
after this, because there's no necessary reason for this to happen, besides wanting to have an addition. And, I mean, we can't not make exceptions if this exception is made. That's my concern, and this is the oldest historic district in the city. So
Yeah.
where do we, if we don't draw the line here, there's no line.
The district guidelines are clear.
I would think that if there were a reason for the exception, right, and we've talked about this with other auxiliary units, right? If there were a reason for the exception that were so narrowly defined that this were the only place that it could possibly happen, right? The exception, as long as you're within the 400 block and the 30, right, and you're on the odd side of the street and some ridiculous, but if there were some reason that could narrow the definition of what that exception is, maybe, but I guess in what we've seen so far, right, to your point, I don't know that I see a reason for the exception other than my kitchen's really small and this is a better place to put it than,
And I don't
the
think you're
dining room is.
necessarily going to need to destroy the dining room. Can't you save some of those pieces and build them in if you do extend to the south?
But I guess one of the things is, if you can't extend here, you have to be in a little bit. I mean, you're not buying really any room by going that way if you move the kitchen to the other side, right?
But do you understand that if we allow this, anybody can come in here and cite this as
Precedent.
as a precedent?
I would-
And it doesn't end at that point.
There is a precedence already, though. There are other properties that
Well,
have
but
exceptions.
those
Not-
two
not
had the
really.
exceptions.
But they're
I think both of
old.
those were corner lots.
I also think that and this is, it's not a comfortable thing to say, but since I've been on the commission, we've had this is the second major exception we've made to our guidelines to accommodate a commissioner's work on their home, and I personally don't think it politically looks great. And I mean, I just want to come out and say that if to approve a major addition like this that contradicts guidelines for a, for a commissioner. I'm personally not comfortable with it.
That's a fair point, Jordan. I also think we do have to be flexible with our guidelines and possibly revisit this particular guideline. Is 125 really what we want?
I think that's something we would have
Right.
to.
'Cause where did that
consi-
number come from?
That's something
Where
that we
did
would have to actually
125
think about in the
Yeah.
grander
Yeah.
in the entire neighborhood.
But I think 13 feet past the 125 guideline is too far, and we have to say no. There's no exception, there's no reason for an exception.
It doesn't seem like, I mean, I don't know, how much do other houses expand that far, and no one seems to like have that concern. I understand that they were there before the guideline was there, but it's still like, I don't know, no one's complaining that it messes with the aesthetic of Summit Street. In addition, it's in the back of the house. I think there's been a lot of discussion about things that happen in the back of the house that we seem to, I don't want to say not care about, but we care about a little bit less than the things that happen in the front of the house. So that, to me,
And
I don't know, it makes
I'd
me-
also like to know where the 125 feet started from, where did that number originate from? And I honestly can say the fact that Nicole is on it, I can separate that. That's what our job is, to separate that. So I don't consider that an issue at all. I'm looking at this, if this was Joe Schmo in the audience, I'd say the same thing. You're trying to preserve that dining room, I get it. This 125, where did it come from? Why do we have it?
I think that there's also something to be said for you buy a home in a historic district, the oldest historic district in the town, and this is a luxury addition. It's not. I don't know. To me, it's very clear it's not an option, but unless we revisit the entire neighborhood, we have to be prepared for an influx of requests.
Well, and this
just like
was
this.
like a more unique guideline for our commission that we don't normally see, is this backyard type preservation guideline, right? It's not so much a structure guideline, is it? Is it
No.
more of a way of life or a?
I do have three things I can add.
Okay.
So one, I do believe pretty strongly, and David is here, he can also respond to things, but I think that saving the dining room is, what I'm assuming is what they are thinking of as the reason for needing the exception. So I think that in the applicant's mind, they have a reason for the exception. I think the 125 feet just came from the fact that most of the houses tend to be that depth. I think it probably, given the way that things are studied for guidelines, they probably looked at what the length of general houses are, what they tend to be set back at, and used some math. I'm only assuming there. We don't have documentation about why the guidelines were set up in certain ways. I do know that it was part of the 2004 guidelines. I think that might have been the first one, but I actually don't even know that. So there are certain things that I would have to get back to you on. In my mind, there is one major project that came up since I've been here where how far the house projected into the rear yard was a deal. And so I'll tell you about it very, very briefly. In 2015, 610 Ronalds was a house that was pretty small and had been urinated in by cats for years. And a developer bought it, and he wanted to take it down, claiming that it was structurally unsound and irretrievable. Their engineer said that, well, the typical historic construction was structurally unsound, but that it was irretrievable because of cat urine. And then, we had some study information. And with any demolition, the commission has to look at the house, but then also review what it's being replaced with. It was going to be replaced with a basic gable front house that was 2 stories plus attic, and it was aligned with the front facades, but it was extending further back than all of the neighbors. And I was trained by my person at that point in time that this was an issue because in the neighborhoods where we have the rhythm of streets and alleys and streets, being able to look across the backyards was part of that neighborhood. And so we told the owner and architect, we suggested heavily that they limit the size of the building. I mean, of course, there was the fact that they wanted it to be a rental and, as many bedrooms as possible. So there was an ulterior motive as well. The public, as you might think, came out for this. I mean, we had a full house, and one of they were concerned about the demolition, but they were kind of okay with it. But the project was not approved because of the length of the house extending into the rear yards. And in my mind, that was it.
That's right behind me.
Yeah.
That lot size, I don't think is anywhere comparable to this lot.
It
size
is not.
At all. Yeah.
And that is just the
all.
only example I can really think of where we really were looking at what was happening in the space of the rear yards.
I wish that in this diagram, they were lined up so that we could get a better sense, with even including the garage, so we could get a better sense of how things fit in the yard comparatively.
Like how much of the rear we are
Yeah,
actually.
exactly, because, that's not actually something I considered before, was a sight line from the neighbors' yards and how that, I had never even thought about that until you just
Well, and
mentioned
we
it, but.
have a site plan, but it doesn't have, I don't think I put it in here, and it doesn't have other neighboring properties. So,
But the
We had some map views.
the map views, I feel like would give some sense of
Some
it.
sense of it, yeah.
yeah, this is the one that I did where it shows it here.
That's right next door to it.
The house next to it is shorter, and then we have one of the, we have
The yellow
two
one.
of the longer ones on either side. It happens that in this neighborhood, there is a little bit more of some of the longer ones, but then this house is also one of the shortest.
So the 419 is the direct neighbor to the south, or to the north,
No, to the south.
to the south.
Oh, yeah, to the north, I'm sorry. I was like, I even forgot which house we were talking about for a second.
Okay, and,
Yeah.
and that 419.
Let me see if one of their images
That's
is,
145, so this would be less, it would extend less far than the house directly next to the north.
It
So if
would.
sightline may be less of an issue, that's kind of a moot, that wouldn't really matter. Unless the neighbors really want to see 419 South Summit.
I guess too, how much of the backyard, like if our reasoning for saying 125 is our number because the backyard needs to be spacious, big, I don't know what exactly they're aiming for with that. How much of the backyard here, like is this a big backyard? Are we concluding this or is this the driveway? Like, I don't know what to do. Like, are we
Yeah, is that-
actually defending a backyard that
Or
maybe
is that
doesn't
the
even?
driveway, yeah?
Right.
Is that an actual outline of the driveway, that gray? So you're just going in,
Like,
it's rear yards, meaning the space.
Sure.
So, one way to think about it is, if we go back to the question that they asked us to talk about,
Oh,
and, so it sounds like we have a bit of a mixed bag, which is probably not an awesome answer, right? It's not like we're all saying, yes, absolutely, and we're not all saying, no way.
so maybe what we need to do is go down the line. And everybody say,
Would we approve this plan?
or would we
Or-
consider?
and maybe this is not a yes or no. They need some idea of whether or not their project's going to get approved. And when it comes before you, you'll make a vote. And that'll be pretty clear. You can split right down the middle, and then we have to figure that out. I don't know, but
But there are costs
don't-
here with an architect
yeah, there are
involved.
costs because they
Yes.
do have to. So I think that we can just do a straight-up vote. It won't be as formal as a certificate of appropriateness vote. Or you can just go down the line,
don't
talk
think we have
about
to
how you
vote.
feel about it. And if someone says something that changes your opinion, then maybe you should speak up.
Yeah, I don't think we have to vote. We just go down the line and answer the two questions.
Yeah. And I'll try to keep track in some form.
Can you go back to the layout again? I know this is, keep having to do that.
Which one?
But I
This
like,
one?
I want to see
Yes.
the questions again.
I know. Well, first of all, I mean, I agree with what Jordan was saying about we set a precedent if we allow it. But I also don't like the way it looks like a kitchen addition slapped on the back that doesn't belong with the house.
I agree.
I would almost say, go with what staff recommends as an addition with the dining room. And if we were gonna say, okay, and you can add 5 feet to the back of the house to make it all bigger. In my mind, that would look better with the house. The exception would be kind of in line with a lot of the other homes that are past the 125. I know that there's this idea about the dining room. Well, those 2 built-ins in the corners, those are from the 1930s or 40s. And, you know, the flooring, you can get oak flooring or maple flooring and put it on a diagonal. I do it all the time. I mean, you can make the new dining room look like the old dining room and make the rest of the house look like it's part of the house, because in my estimation, this addition does not work with that house.
And still make the kitchen bigger, too.
Still make the kitchen bigger. But anyway, that's.
I
you
do,
know.
I do think this whole thing is an addition from the 30s. I think that's part of
Probably,
their
yeah.
redo was this entire
You know,
thing. Whether or
from-
not, I don't know where the kitchen would have been otherwise, but it
With
could
the
have been
main
in a different
structure of the
building.
house, do you think it's probably 1880s?
It's 1870s, we know.
Okay,
uh-huh.
yeah, then
And
that-
so
then
they
that
would
would
have
be an
had a
addition.
kitchen that was out back.
Summer
Yes.
kitchen. Mhm.
Yeah. Because that's like the 533s, the similar.
Let's do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, so when they did their remodel and made it no longer Italianate, really, I'm assuming because of how they set it in from the corner. I mean, frankly, it's a tell. I think that that's an addition.
Yeah, that's why I think that dining room is not that.
But, I mean, it's still a 1930s historic addition.
And there's not really a way to extend it further west into the backyard while preserving the dining room on that side of the house. I mean, I don't know. I can't think of how that could be done. I mean, if you were able to pick up the dining room and move it to the edge, and then extend the kitchen, and then
I think his suggestion was take this and just go further back.
yeah,
Right.
exactly. But then you wouldn't be preserving the original shape of the dining room or whatever.
You know, if the commission has a desire to let them extend past the 125 feet, but not necessarily 13 feet, I don't think nobody can speak to what that means right now. I mean, we do have other guidelines that they'll have to follow. And so, you know, whether or not they can extend south and west, I don't know. I mean, it still needs to work for the house.
Right. I mean, I think, wouldn't we say, let's just say we're not concerned about the 125 feet. I don't know that we would like that addition on the back of that house anyway.
But that's something that you'll review in the future.
I mean, my experience is with older homes, everything that you see within this area can be completely altered, adjusted. You're going to be, with kitchens, every Victorian home on Summit Street's had about 4 different kitchen configurations over the course of the 130 years or more, 150 years that they've been there. So that's not really an issue, really, that I see.
You're not concerned with the interior, or what, the integrity of the interior?
No.
Doesn't seem like that's, like, I mean, from what I've heard, I appreciate the fact that it meets the values of the commission that it wants to keep original structure. It's a shame that we care more about the outside than the inside in this regard. I know that we do. That's I'm not saying that needs to change. It's just that this does seem to be, it goes along with the values that we want. It just doesn't meet this one rule that we have. That seems to be a rule that it just doesn't seem to apply in a way that, to me, makes a lot of sense.
Does the kitchen have to be that large? I mean, I guess I'm just like, could it be a longer, narrower kitchen and still be a efficient space?
So,
You know.
Jordan, our guidelines for additions are really clear.
Okay.
That it starts with a paragraph that says, figure out what addition will work with the exterior of the house, then figure out what your interior does.
Yeah.
And so, and that is preservation wide, and frankly, I think that should be a rule throughout architecture.
Yeah.
You know, you shouldn't just like, oh, work out your space and you want this space to flow into here and then you end up making a snake. You know, you should always have a design that works on the exterior first, but architects don't design that way either. So it is always with them a push to get them to actually look at the exterior and how it fits first, and then figure out how to configure the interior to work with that. But the thing is, it's always possible. So, yeah, the commission can decide, frankly, that they could have a 6-foot bump out, which, you know, structurally, you actually have to have walls and a roof.
Right.
And then, yes, they could figure out a way to make a workable, larger, better kitchen. But also, they could do it differently with a 13 by 14 kitchen.
So
you
two
know.
questions. The first question is just like, can they go past it? Done, question mark. With
Yeah, we
no
do
real-
want to, know, I mean, because, yeah, we could work on the existing, you know, for them, if they're going to hire their architect, we need to make some adjustments to this with the roof and maybe that setback on the side, you know, stuff like that. And, you know, it would be less work than maybe a total redesign with anything else. So that's why, yeah, if the commission is thinking that there's no problem with the 13 feet, then we want to know that so that they could just move forward.
But that first question is just, are we cool with the 13 feet? And the second question is, would we be cool with anything less than?
Yeah, because
Yeah.
if you're not, then what is it? Is there somewhere that is okay, or should they just look at maybe on the south side? So, yeah, that's why the second question is in there, is just to find out if there's somewhere in between or not.
Well, Jessica, you
I
put a
don't
lot
know.
of work, it looks like, into measuring that street. I mean, I'd be willing to entertain an exception based on what is the average of those properties that go past the 125? Let's just say, if you go down the whole block and you've got all those numbers, and it says the average over the limit extension is 8 feet, we could then, therefore, as a commission, I think, say, well, we're willing to make that exception because that's sort of the average. And actually, and with the zoning, they do that setback averages all the time. That's
Yeah.
a thing that they do just in general on non-historic districts. You can have averages,
Yeah, that's for the front setback, but.
front setback average.
We
But
just have to do that prepared to do it
But-
again and again and again.
But we have a reason why we made that exception. It's just not pulling it out of thin air. Oh, they wanted 13, so we gave them 13. Well, no, we went down the entire 3 blocks of Summit Street, and we found out that it's, you know, the average is 8 feet, or
Sure.
whatever, 5. But that's what we could allow. We could
Yeah.
make that exception. That's what I'd be willing, so my input for that first question would be that. The design is a whole nother issue.
Right. And Jessica, if I hypothetically were going to vote no, can we, I just lost my thought. Are we, can we come up with an exception? Can I vote no without having a reason of a reason from the 3 types of exception? Those being a documented exception from the past, uncommon scenario, or no applicable
mean-
guideline existing. Can I just vote no because I feel like it?
Well, I mean,
Or yes,
would vote-
can I vote yes to an exception just because I want to? Or does it have to be?
no, the section on exceptions says that the commission can apply an exception, but you have to state the reason for it.
Oh, no,
So the averages maybe
I
would
can
be-
give you the
We
exact
can just come up
words.
with anything, any reason for the exception.
A
It-
reasonable
it-
reason.
It has to fit within one of those 3 things.
Oh, it just has to fit.
Documented,
Yeah.
silent or unclear, or an uncommon situation. So you would
have
have
to
to
be-
say, for instance, it's an uncommon situation, and what is that?
Yeah,
Though
I
that-
would be open to an exception, but I think we need to revisit the 125-foot thing.
Meaning,
But I'm open to an exception.
meaning giving the, like, coming up with the average or addressing the 125 thing
125.
completely?
Completely, but in this case, I'm open to allowing an exception. I am
Ryan
with
as
Frank,
well.
though, that we get into the other things that we're not discussing right now or voting on.
Right.
But as far as the whole, yeah, it's 13 feet past our 125, I am open to considering that as an exception.
So, I'm really torn between, wow, that's a super clear rule, and can you pull up the map again? I mean, the ship may have sailed a little bit already
Yeah.
in the immediate neighborhood of the house. I mean, please remind me, I know you've done this, sorry, like, the immediate neighbor to the, what is it, the north? Like,
419.
Yes.
This
how
neighbor,
much more,
This neighbor.
how much would, 431 get to be in line with the back of their immediate neighbor?
That's 148. That's at 148 feet, and this would be 138, or that's one.
So, yeah, I think that 419 is about 145 feet.
So it's
And that's
still
right next to this house?
4 feet, or 10
Yeah.
feet shorter than.
That's,
Yeah, so this
I
would
just
be
think that 125 is just such an arbitrary number, and I don't feel like we're being frivolous, like, oh, we're opening floodgates. Like, this is a historical addition to a historical house that will have to meet all guidelines. I don't feel like I'm making,
I don't
you
think
know,
we're
like, oh,
opening up a
everybody can slap
free-for-all.
on something. I mean,
We might
It-
be.
We are.
But the fact that there is an older neighbor who got, I guess,
Who
grants.
has-
But that was before 1948.
Yeah, what I'm saying is, but the
Yellow,
fact
what is
that there isn't a historic neighbor who has that condition, I feel lends a little bit of like,
Oh,
well,
I
you're
see what you're
immediately
saying.
next to them. I mean, it's a bit tougher
Well,
to
and
argue in this
Jessica
case.
gave the story about the north side house on Ronald's, that, there was a clear reason in that neighborhood with the streets and the alleyways, and all of a sudden, somebody was proposing almost a total blocking of your backyard view.
yeah.
And I think that's why the guideline was created, or maybe it wasn't, but you were kind of giving that as an
The
example.
guideline was created long before that.
So, I don't know if the guideline's there to give everybody this nice, wonderful backyard.
May I ask,
It's the reason they listed, right?
you-
The
do you-
reasoning was so somebody didn't take a structure all the way to the alley and
But
block.
So this guideline, this restriction preserves the openness of rear yards. That's the reason for the guideline.
And that, I will
And in-
say, is something I like about older neighborhoods. They're more open, I guess.
I would look at the
There's
size of this
backyard
house and
space.
that lot, and I'm not sure that's restricting the rear yard on this house.
Yeah,
I'm just
like it's
open
been-
to it. I'm just open to discussion for it. I'm not saying
I
go
worry, I
for
could
it,
like,
but
well, I don't understand why roof configurations have to be a certain way. Like, why not? I mean, look, this is a hypothetical argument because actually I'm not adverse to this. I mean, I could still be swayed either way. But like, oh, I don't understand why. Like, let's just kill it. Like, you can't do that as a commission. Am I right? Like, I don't know why, but somebody surely had to have had a reason to make the rule in the first place.
Yeah.
Like a good reason. Roof
Yeah, we're not
history,
talking
like a
right now
made-up
about changing the guidelines, period.
Yeah.
Right, we're talking about making an exception.
So whether or not you guys want to change the 125-foot rule or not is a no right now. And it's a no for at least a year, I would say. So
And at
I'm
this
sorry
point-
about that.
And at this point, we don't have a reason for an exception. Is
Besides
that
preserving-
accurate? Based on our guidelines?
I mean,
Yes.
there is some precedent already in the neighborhood. There is.
The commission needs to determine if
hard-
there's an uncommon situation. So if you can, that's, period.
I guess it doesn't, to your point, it doesn't actually, seemingly at this point, I don't know exactly where all the sight lines are and things like that, but does it actually preserve the openness of a rear yard, I guess? Because if the point is for the openness of the rear yard to be like, don't block my view of something, it's like, well, who's blocking whose view?
It's a vibe.
Well, the one thing I would say for that.
not somebody else's
But it's the oldest historic neighborhood in the city.
What-
And it's, and it is a vibe. I mean, I'm sorry to use, Zoomer terms, but that's real. That is the feel of a neighborhood.
Well, it's a vibe, but it's somebody's backyard. I've never been back there.
Yeah.
I don't know.
You can, if you drive
don't
down,
live on
if you drive down the alley, you can see that quite well. That 437 and 435, those are the duplexes that are right there. And if you look, they're probably the shortest ones on the block. 431 is just right there, and then as you see, everybody else, 447, 419, 415, 411, do shoot back quite a bit more. So again, that's why I would say, we could, if we all say we're willing to make an exception, the exception would be, it's, what's the word? It's
Uncommon
for them
situation?
because they've got the short house. And they want to make it a little bit longer, but we say, okay, an average, without
Short-
getting in trouble.
short house?
I know, the short house, I know. I didn't say short bus. But,
It's a contractor.
so should we get the, just, I've got
I don't think.
Just
I
whether
don't
or
know.
not
I
we
know,
I don't know
it's,
how we
it's
move on
very
at this
much
point.
not clear to me yet where we're falling
So
on this.
this
So
is-
I
just
think
need
we
to
should
go down
just
the line,
go down the
right?
line.
Yeah.
So start with Noah, 13 feet or not?
Or open to the exception, right? Open to discussion, is that right?
Well,
Or,
I think it's supposed.
I mean,
We need to think about the rules.
they are gonna wanna know if it's gonna get approved or not.
Right.
So,
But that's not the question we're answering right now,
But may
right?
I
Like,
also
there's
s-
nothing for us to approve.
But may I also say, is it, did the architect, was the architect aware of the guidelines? Was this misjudged? I mean, so
there
can
was a
another-
mistake made, and
So I mean, one of my hesitations is always like, well, you don't want to spend more money, do more work, but, you know, maybe more work needs to be done in this case. I don't know.
the architect measured from the property line instead. And it's never been measured that way. It says Front Street.
So I
That's
mean,
what happened.
I would like to see an alternative design. That's what I would like to see. If we're, I was going down the line, starting in the middle.
I guess I would say that I am open to the possibility of an exception. 13 feet is just as arbitrary a number for the exception as 2, right? So finding some logic to understand the reason, if we accept an exception, finding a logic to what that exception should be, I think would be important for me if I were to consider it.
It will be a requirement for you guys to state the exception.
Yeah, well, Frank can come up with something uncommon, which I think he's good at, then that's a reason.
So I have right now that Carl is open to it and Jordan wants an alternative design.
To be clear, I am open to an exception. I'm not saying I'm open to the 13 feet,
An exception.
just because I don't see a justification for the 13 feet.
right.
Maybe
I'm also open to an exception.
open to exception? Noah. Okay.
I'm open to an exception.
Christina, open to exception. And if you want to add any words to this, I'm writing exactly that down.
Well, I'm open and basing it on an average of those properties that are over the 125 and just see what that is.
Based on average.
Then we actually have a legitimate or a real concrete reason how we came up with that number. We just didn't pull it out of thin air.
Okay, Margaret?
I'm
Somebody
open
can
to an
repeat it. Somebody comes up and
exception.
say, well, that's what it's allowed.
I'm open to exception to line up with a pre-1945 immediate neighbor.
Which is the longest house in the neighborhood.
Right.
Yeah, I know. I mean, so maybe that's too much, but yeah.
Yeah, I know that the one that's had the exception where they said it was 4 and then it became 6,
Yeah.
Barker House.
Yeah.
That was done probably about 2004, if I remember correctly. And it looks good, and that's probably where they all of a sudden came up with, that happened,
2006.
2006. Yeah, I kind of remember when that happened.
Is that the one on the corner?
It's not the corner, it's the next one, and it's to
like
the
right
north
here?
of the alley.
Was the one on the corner, the one where the owner wanted age in place? Was that the one
No,
No, that's here.
that's the Van Gilder's house.
on corner?
Yeah, this corner.
Yeah,
That's
that
corner of Court.
He was talking
and-
about this one, which is
Right.
near this corner.
But the other one was extended past 125, right?
Correct.
Yeah,
447 is one.
A lot.
a lot,
That would
exactly.
be just a foot longer than 447.
Okay.
I guess I'm open to the exception as well.
Okay. Deanna?
I am not. Sorry.
So generally, I hear that you're open to an exception, but we don't know what that is yet specifically. And so,
But we kind of like Frank's idea, maybe.
I mean, I think that's completely.
We have it.
I mean, that is a way to provide a limitation, but that's not an exception. I mean, there has to be a reason.
Preserving the dining room.
Yeah, but that's interior stuff.
Uncommon, it's gotta be something uncommon.
Right, what is it?
But what about precedent, though?
Or that's just an
We don't really
uncommonly
have
small
precedent
one.
because we review every house individually.
So the
So,
one on the
Those
corner
reasons.
that we were just talking about, that wouldn't fit?
I mean, that was their own situation on that lot with that house. And so their situation was the fact that they couldn't add an addition to the north side that would better follow the guidelines because of the historic part of the house that needed to remain.
That's also kind of
And
a corner house. too.
It was a big lot, and so they would have enough open space no matter what. As the minute said, it was like twice the size,
they
twice the
went-
open space as everybody else.
But they went past the 125.
Correct. Yeah, the exception would have been that the lot would not allow them to add to the north side, so they had to add to the rear side, and that they had a big enough lot that it was not going to impact their open space to
Because
extend that
that's the
so
guideline.
far. So there would have been two reasons, in my mind at least, why there was an exception for that house.
But we can't just use that as historic precedents to change.
No, we don't talk about precedent and historic preservation because of the fact that that situation cannot be applied to this house. It doesn't have twice as much open space as everybody else, and it doesn't have a historic part of the house on the north side not allowing it to be added to on that side. So there could be an uncommon situation because a lot is too small or something like that.
Right.
I mean, right now, I don't see what that uncommon situation is. Typically, I'm the person who makes up what the exception is.
Couldn't you say?
I don't see it right now, but that doesn't mean it
His
won't come up.
Exception
Yeah.
there, it looks like it could be one of the narrower lots on the block. And so therefore, they can't go.
Well, the homeowner can come up with an exception
Yeah.
and present it to us, present it to you.
They can.
Is there a thing
But
to
we
say,
have-
like, an exception would be that it doesn't seem to, at least again, in my point of view for this, it doesn't seem to violate the nature of the rule, right? I mean, if you want openness, there's a number of houses, as we've talked about, that go back. Does that count as a reason?
Yeah, I mean, that is a conversation that the commission has had.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you can talk about, like, what's the reason? The whole idea of the fact that 330 had twice as much open space as everybody else, they were looking at the reason for that guideline. And they are looking at the fact that, wow, I think that we're not going to impact the reason why we have this guideline on this property because of how much open space they have. So, yeah, looking at the reason for the guideline and determining that you're not violating the reason for the guideline is valid. So I think that there's room here, but it's still a little bit unclear exactly how it would be reviewed. So we'll have to try to work through that a little bit. And it might be that there's something comes up that's very clear. It might remain somewhat nebulous. I don't know. I think just for their sake as well, I mean, it's not going to take long since we have the numbers to figure out what the average was. And so we can have that information for you as well. But, we'll just talk to them through it. David's been here, so he's seen the whole conversation. Did you want to add anything, David? You can totally come up here. You do need to sign in.
And while the homeowner's signing in, I hate to keep belaboring this. Yeah, I hate to keep belaboring this, but the homeowner has to present a reason for the exception.
Correct.
We can't come up with that for them.
No,
They only have 3 categories that they can kind of figure out, what is our exception? And then we can vote on whether we approve that reason for the exception.
that's correct. When I said that I usually come up with them, it's because I usually am the person who finds out that they can't do what they want to do, and then I try to come up with a reason. And no, it's not always, I'm
Right.
not always successful.
But
But yeah, it is on them to have a complete application that complies with the guidelines.
Yeah.
So yes, go ahead.
So I apologize, everyone, for their how lengthy this is. In respect for your time, I'll try to keep this brief. Just to introduce myself, my name is David. I live at 431 South Summit Street. I think one of the main things that, in retrospect, upon making the application, that I think I failed to fully describe was kind of the intent, the full intent behind kind of how we arrived at the design we have. If you go back to kind of the overall layout of that current house, we'll all accept that it's a very small kitchen. It's 7 feet by 8 feet functionally. So, New York City standards in the Midwest. I think that's why when we first bought it, it was on the market for 6 months. Because simply put, not many people want to live in that. When we initially took a look at redoing the kitchen, in terms of cost, right, you don't want to build walls. You don't want to move out. You don't want to do as much as you can. We wanted to try and keep the charm of the house. We think it's extremely charming without impacting as much of the design as possible. We did look at just maybe tearing down some walls, trying to reconfigure things. The issues we run into fully, and part of the reason why just simply bumping out that southern dining room wall, which it seems like it's 8 feet, but when you take into account the fact that you would still have to set it back from that southern den wall by the eave height, at least probably 6 inches, maybe more, maybe less, you're ending up at about 7 feet of space, which, we could potentially work with. The problem, and one of the things we tried to address in our design, is if you look at the kitchen itself, functionally the kitchen is half that size. We cannot touch, theoretically, maybe somehow with, unlimited funds could address that staircase as well as the rear entryway to the house. If you look at the picture, and the reason we mainly included the picture is to get a functional idea of what kind of bottleneck that creates. So not only is that a kitchen too small to even open many things into, but it's also the primary pathways to 2 of the main places in the house. And so when we tried to address the staircase, first of all, leading into the basement, it's a 24-inch wide space with 67 inches of headroom. And so going into the basement itself, and it's an old basement too, so it's not like it's got standard, modern treads, modern heights, or anything like that. And so part of the redesign tried to incorporate kind of a reworking of that basement entry, try to kind of funnel the rear entryway a little bit away from that choke point and try to create a little bit more open space in that kitchen. When we tried to incorporate all those things into, first of all, the current space we have, that was just simply impossible. When we tried to maybe just bump out a couple feet one way or the other, maybe minimize disturbing the overall feel. First of all, one of our goals originally had been to minimize disturbance to the dining room because it is so beautiful. But when we decided, what if we decided we would have to completely eliminate that dining room or at least move it, like with the built-ins and things like that, what could we achieve with that? Still, because of that rear space, we're very limited in the actual functional space we would gain. And so that's why our architect ended up deciding, trying to totally, in his interpretation of, I think, the rear setback, adding that rear space. Now, that rear space, I think we all accept, could use some work. And it wasn't meant to be, the final design. This was a preliminary design. The problem we run into is that we do have one of the narrow lots on the street. So we have 60 feet total. The house is limited in terms of moving north, and I don't know that we could anyway because of we would want to protect the original lines of the house. We can't move south any. And so we're really left with no space to work with. And so that's why we wanted to bring this to the commission because we started looking at, okay, overall, do we even have anything to work with? Is this even worth bringing to your attention? We did review, and the reason we included the average rear setbacks is, at least by my calculations, were very rough. I'm not an expert like you are. So I would defer the actual calculation, but our rough calculations, approximately 134 feet is the average on Summit Street, including all the houses. On the western side of Summit Street, which is the side we're on, it's actually larger. And so I do accept that we would have to go with what the current modern guidelines state. But we also don't believe that we would be violating the inherent nature or the intent of what the guidelines were meant to preserve, which, as you already very well described, is a spacious rear yard, which we then included the average approximation of the distance for the rear yards. Ours is approximately, and again, I would defer the actual measurement, 79 feet or so. And if you look at the average rear yards on Summit Street, they all tend to, especially on the western side, tend to fall closer to maybe 70. On the eastern side, it's much less than that. And so we don't believe that even, 13 feet, okay, maybe less, we'd ultimately, I think that even if you wanted to say 13 feet, we would still have a pretty spacious yard. But most standards, especially within Iowa City, if not, nationwide. Otherwise, the biggest reason we wanted to bring this to is that functionally, we don't know that this would be a project worth pursuing without some rear setback modifications. What the quantity of that would be, we would leave up to the commission. We would try to work with the architect to see if there's something we could do that would also incorporate maybe the southern side as well. But if we are not allowed to violate that rear setback at all, for 7 feet by 15 feet, those are bearing walls. We would have to put in a ton of work, simply put, and it probably still wouldn't function. It would not be a project worth pursuing, but my bigger sadness, I think, ultimately would be that this house, by any modern standards, it does not function to what most people would want or expect.
Maybe on Summit Street.
I think that could be up to debate. I mean, most of the houses on Summit Street that have those amenities sell within really quickly. The fact that ours sold in 6 months, makes me, it makes me pause. So not to say that there's not, but I guess I want to make this a home that people see as worth preserving, not only today, but for generations to come. If we don't make this house worth living in for families today, then I just worry what it would do for the future, because we are very limited, and I don't see those limitations necessarily changing anytime soon. Otherwise, I believe that's it.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so I'm curious. It almost sounds like, well, maybe this is too personal, but if you aren't able to redo the kitchen, are you thinking you'll move?
We don't have kids currently. If we did, I mean, in the past generations, they obviously did it, right? I don't believe, though, that we would want to, simply put.
And it's not a true New York kitchen because it doesn't have a bathtub in it. Have you guys seen this article? There's an article out right now about bathtubs in New York kitchens. You've got to check it out.
That's old news. Didn't Kramer do cooking in the shower in one episode?
Yeah, I mean,
Irrelevant.
I would agree. I mean, I do think, like, I think one of the things when I came on the historic preservation is I do see, like, these houses on South Summit and, like Brown Street and other historic neighborhoods, they honestly shouldn't just be for somebody who has a wheelbarrow full of money, in the sense of you have to be so wealthy to afford these places, to preserve them. I don't think that's true. And I see how just bumping out, that's a lot. It's going to be cheaper. It is going to be cheaper that way, and you have a family in this house who wants to stay in this house. I mean, there's a big picture to historic preservation about getting people to raise their kids in these neighborhoods. And I'm not saying, oh, we can just put willy-nilly anything in here. I don't think that's what's happening here. You have an architect, you have people who are invested in this neighborhood. Whether she's on the commission or not to be has nothing to do with it. This is exactly who I want to see buying these houses and living in these neighborhoods. And I think we have some justification for looking at a 13, a 12, a 14, whatever it is, addition on the back of this house, because we do have other properties, the two on each side of it at, what is it, one's 145, one's 137, that's 141 average. This is 138 going out. So I mean, I just feel like there is some, I'm totally open to an exception, because I think this is exactly what the future is going to look like. We need people to fix up these old houses, yet they shouldn't have to be so wealthy that you'll never be able to afford ever a house on this street, especially young families, potentially young families. I do think we need to think about that and the reasons why we're doing things on this commission.
I'd still like to see another design.
I don't think we'd be able to do a design if there was, if everyone here said today, or if at least the ultimate consensus was that there's no give on the rear setback, it's not worth doing another design. I think what we're hearing is that there may be potentially some give. With that in mind, we could potentially approach the architect again and say, what is the best, most concise plan? But again, that's why we wanted to approach regarding simply the setback, because if, without kind of an understanding of where we stand, further steps may or may not be worthwhile. So
Knowing
that's
that
why.
we're open to an exception is fine, but you need a number. How many feet can you go back past that? That's what you need to know.
You know,
right?
I mean, I say this partly for David's sake, but I mean, I feel now that I have enough information to help them move forward. If you guys feel that you need to input more, you certainly can, but I feel like we have a conversation next week, and I can see a direction moving forward, and I think we just need to talk about that and go forward, you know.
I'd love it if you took it from here. Jessica, thank you so
Great
much.
time. I appreciate everybody's time.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. So we're moving on to the next item. Carl has asked if we can move item H above the item F. Is that possible? So that,
Frank Wagner is leaving.
okay, Frank Wagner's leave.
And I'm gonna have to leave somewhat soon.
Do we
which
need
is
to
why I
grab
was-
Nikki back as well?
Yeah, Frank, can you?
Yep. Yeah, we can skip all of the report of certificates issued by staff and chair. That's not a problem.
Okay.
We can go, yeah, I think we need to do the minutes, however.
Yep.
And we do need to do at least one portion of our commission discussion, the
Yes.
part that I need to talk to you about.
That's what we, that's what.
The
I
other
think
part
Carl
is
would like.
100% up to you guys.
Okay. Yep.
But,
All right, so.
so you.
Consideration of minutes?
You guys are basically, you don't have to vote, but everybody wants to skip down to the minutes, is that correct?
Yes.
Work for everybody?
And to
Okay.
be clear, I was suggesting that we reorder, not skip, but maybe we just
Sounds
see
like
the-
it might not be
Maybe we
proper.
just see those next.
I mean, if once Carl leaves, we would still have a quorum, so we could do the rest, but I'm perfectly fine with skipping myself.
Okay. All right. Item G, consideration of minutes for August 10th, 2023.
Anyone have any edits?
Great. Do we
Did you
vote to
read it?
approve?
No. So somebody needs to just make a motion that they'll accept the minutes as
Bowman
written.
moves to approve the minutes for the August 10th to 2023 meeting.
Beck, seconds.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Item H, commission discussion, and I assume you'd like to move on to item 2 the Historic Preservation Awards.
Yeah, actually, I'd like to cover that first, if that's all right. So we're moving forward with the awards. We are getting some stragglers in right now. Some of it I'm going to write, otherwise I'm assigning it to you guys. That works great. We totally need to assign people who are going to present them. And it's because I don't know that all the writers want to do it, and we have one section that wasn't written by somebody other than me. I'm not going to present them because I'm in charge of something else. So basically, what we'll have is we will have a laptop, and you will forward probably 3 times for each property. I mean, literally, it's down to that, maybe more, depends on the property. You will have a script that will be written, and it'll be printed in a large print.
See it beforehand?
You will get to read your script ahead of time. The scripts are coming in to me, and then I do an edit, and then it can go to the reader then. Right now, no, I cannot tell you that you'll have it on this date.
Right.
I
Maybe
don't
on
know.
the date of the.
You will have it in advance.
Okay. Of reading it.
So,
And I will print that, so you can print and make notes if you want, but I will have a copy there. I will try to find out pronunciation of everyone's names. However, there might be some where I don't, or maybe you don't say it the way that we learn, and that is okay. So don't worry about that. So
How many awards are there this year?
I don't know right now.
Okay.
So painting, we will have 3.
Okay.
Deanna, how many rehabs did I tell you there were?
I have 4, but I think there are more than that.
Yeah, so,
Do you have rehabs too?
I think, didn't you send me 3? Does that make sense?
and you have additions and new construction? Or do you have rehabs? What do you have? Do you know?
Apologize, no, so I got the files, I haven't gone over them, but I will.
Wait, Deanna, what did you write? You wrote something and sent it to me.
Yes. So
What property?
there were 2 on Governor, there was 1 on College. They're all rehab, I know.
Oh,
they're
okay,
all
so
rehab.
residential rehab, one of the painting ones is becoming a rehab, but if I can get it to her in time, Nicole's gonna write that one. She did the painting ones. But it was just enough work that it's a rehab now. So I think we have rehab of residential properties, about 6 of them. We have 2 commercial rehab projects. We have potentially 2 or 3 additions and new constructions. Sherry's going to do the Novich Award, and the county has 1 award that they'll do. So I believe I need 4 presenters.
I'm more than happy to present
I will.
whatever you need.
I can present what I wrote. I'm fine with doing the painting.
Oh, okay. Okay, so we'll put Nicole for painting, for
We have
sure.
to fight each other to present these things.
We're
I promised to write and then present what I wrote, so
There you go.
Okay, and so you're probably doing additions
I
and.
believe that I am, yeah, I think that you're right.
I think you are too. Okay, so we have both residential rehab and commercial rehab. And actually, Jordan, somebody needs to just do this is the commission part. And so you will automatically be assigned that part.
Okay.
And we need to work on that.
Okay.
And you might even want to talk to Kevin, maybe, I don't know.
He's my
But
guru.
yeah, you'll need to, we'll need to have what the commission is working on and,
Yeah.
things we're happy about.
Okay.
And so that's going to be yours.
Do I have to write it?
You might have to at least help
Okay.
because it's not on my to-do list right now.
All right.
Sorry. So we have both Andrew and Carl interested potentially?
Yeah, if you need
Or,
someone.
Was there
right?
someone else also? I thought.
No, Margaret is down. Deanna doesn't want to. And so, yeah. So Carl and Andrew, one of them's long and one of them's short. Whoever raises their hand first for the long one gets it.
Andrew, you want that?
Can't wait.
Fun.
Okay, and so this will be Carl.
Then there's a bar.
And we actually put you in the program. So
Wait, can you say that again?
we list your name in the program.
Okay.
Just an FYI. Okay, so I think that that's all I have for that. Yeah, if you're a writer and I haven't given you everything, I'm sorry. I only tracked down one of the winners today, and they said yes today, and the others have told me yes like 3 weeks ago. So there is a little delay.
All right.
Can you remind us of the date of the ceremony again?
Yeah, Thursday, September 28th.
At the Highlander.
5 o'clock.
At the Highlander. We'll have cookies and juice at 5 and a presentation at 5:30. I'll be there before that, and so if you're presenting, you can show up earlier if you want. The cash bar will be open, that's right outside the area for milling around and drinking afterwards, which is good.
And the Highlanders, the Dodge and 80?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
I was like the Heartland, and I'm like, that's wrong.
Yep.
That's a
Don't go to Heartland.
25 Highlander Drive or Place, so something like that.
And there's a restaurant there and everything. so.
Yeah, their restaurant is a little bit more, I
Got,
don't
like,
know.
bar
it's-
food, and
It's
then I
like
think they've got-
a bar food with, like bar games, like,
Yep, it's like an arcade.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that I did suggest that they open the cash bar right outside the banquet.
Mm-hmm. Which is kind of lovely.
As a slightly more appropriate for
Yep,
preservationist type
it-
of area. Okay,
All right, should we discuss item number 1?
if you guys want to discuss that, it is on the commission for you. I do not have any slides because I didn't pull any together. I also have not entirely read the memo. I just haven't had time, so I'm sorry. The point of this is, if there are questions that you have, I can take down the questions and I can get you answers. You can also ask the questions directly to the senior planners, such as Anne, who has been here, Parker, Kirk. They're all interested in answering any questions. I think that we have several things that are being discussed, and my memo kind of talked about where they are in the process maybe. There is the ability to have accessory dwelling units more widely, and they are actually having an open house to discuss that. Like now, it's probably over. And they had one yesterday as well. It was a little bit on the news, but if you missed that and wanted to go, I mean, you can still talk to Anne. All of the information that they were going to have on their boards for the open house is in the packet.
Has anything changed from the August 2nd memorandum? No?
I don't remember specifically. My memo, I think, mentioned where everything is in the process. The stuff there's something that went on to council.
Yeah.
And so that might not change if council approves it, I would assume. And then there's stuff that went back to P and Z. I'm assuming that's because P and Z couldn't send it on. Whether or not changes will be made, I don't particularly know.
Okay.
There was the building height. The north side had suggested that there was a limitation on building height.
27.
And so that's one of the things. And yeah, I mean, if Sherry's with Friends of Historic Preservation,
Is this regarding the planning and zoning, Sherry?
yeah, it is regarding on the agenda, so we should let her talk.
Great.
Okay, so Sherry DeGraw, and as a former commissioner, I think I'm coming just as much from the North Side neighborhood and Friends of Historic Preservation. One of the things that is of great concern to the North Side neighborhood is a proposal that we have called, it's for neighborhood stabilization for the RNS 12 zone, and it deals with infill development of single-family homes and duplexes. And what we're asking for is for the height of those new structures, should they be built, be 27 feet high. And it's good to take into consideration the way that height is measured when you think about it, if 27 feet should sound not tall enough. And the idea is, the height measure is taken, say, like if you have the apex of the top level, so where the eaves are to the very apex, you divide that height in half. So you might walk around, say, the North Side neighborhood and see houses that look taller than 27 feet, but you have to go first story, second story, and then half of what that full top level is. So for
From
most
the eave
cases.
to the,
Eaves,
Yep.
yeah, eaves to the top, divided in half. 27 feet, we could not find any structures that were single-family homes or duplexes that exceeded that 27 feet. So the conversation might be, okay, so you're talking about the North Side neighborhood. What about the other areas that have RNS 12? We're starting to make contact with people in the College Hill area, and the long-term residents say that we've spoken to like the idea because it's all for neighborhood stabilization, while you might have structures that are smaller that, say, a developer would say, oh, that's a good one to demo. It's not in a historic district, and I could build something new. And at this point, developers have the ability to go up to 35 feet. I think that it might be able to go a little taller than that, perhaps up to 38 feet. And it's, for some of these neighborhoods, it's exactly what Jessica was saying when she described, is it 610 Ronald Street? So the people would have the ability, a developer, to remove a small cottage, say, and go up to 35 feet tall and do significantly bumping out in the back in neighborhoods where there are more modest structures. And so some of the long-term residents and even newer residents who are looking at, oh, I thought I bought into a certain kind of neighborhood, are realizing that there could be major redevelopment. So 27 feet will not prevent redevelopment, but it sort of scales down what can be done. And when there is an RNS 12 lot that is right against a historic or conservation district, if you look at redevelopment in terms of it would be nice for a new structure to be similar to the neighboring homes that have the same, like, proportions, height, density, or scale and mass. It would be nice to duplicate that, but there's sometimes the viewpoint that if it's your land and it's legal, you can build what you want. So we're thinking of how can we mitigate situations where things would be built out of scale and height.
may I ask a question? Jessica, does historic preservation has oversight over what can be built in many of these neighborhoods?
In the districts, I mean, as she said, there could be a property that's right next door,
Yeah.
you know, where the boundary is between it and,
Sure.
you know, something. So
So modifying the planning and zoning proposal would be to protect those situations?
So I think that, yeah, there was a case where there was a house built or proposed right next to a district, and that house was tall, and so the neighborhood came back with the idea of reducing the 35-foot maximum that currently exists to a 27-foot or something like that.
A house on Davenport, the Davenport house?
I think it's
Or-
on Van Buren,
On
isn't
Van
it?
Buren. But
There's
like on
one
the- near-
319 North Van Buren.
Okay.
In that situation, so if it were to go forward, it seems like it could be precedent setting in that it has a 3-car garage. So this was a design that was proposed that was ultimately turned down through a Board of Adjustment, I think. It had a 3-car garage on the basement, on the ground floor level, no basement. The living quarters are on the first floor and the second floor, and so that is what is causing it to get so tall. Compared to other single-family home buildings, I don't know that there are duplexes, it's out of scale. I think even within well, it's a model that could be developed and repeated, where you do the three-car garage on the ground floor, on an alley, and then go tall. So some of the residents in, I think it's College Hill neighborhood, are less excited to see things like that happening. The other portion would be for the bulk of the many.
We need to end the meeting if you leave, so.
Okay, I'll make it quick. For the bulk of the many zoning code amendments that would be made, I think people that are living in the close-in neighborhoods, some of them are historic neighborhoods, are liking the idea if council could suggest pull out the university impact area for now if they want to go forward in passing the zoning code changes, because there are so many variables that have to deal with development and intensity of wanting to build up those close-in neighborhoods that it could transform neighborhood stabilization. So that's it.
So my question for you, Jessica, is what does historic preservation do? Do we put it on the agenda? Do we have a memo? What?
So I think right now, first, if there's any questions, you need to reach out to staff.
Yep.
And if you need help finding the appropriate staff, let me know and I'll help you. Otherwise, I think that my memo talked about when it will be addressed by P and Z and
Yeah.
council, and if it didn't, let me know and I'll tell you that. If you want to comment, go to those meetings.
So there's nothing as
Alternatively-
this body cannot necessarily do.
This is not within our purview.
Okay.
But it does concern issues that we think about. Consistency of neighborhood. I know on my block, I have 2 properties. Everybody on my block is within the historic district, except for 2 properties across from me that are this RNS 12. If they were to rebuild right now, they could build tall, and it would dramatically affect the look and feel of my block. And I will say, I'm not opposed to modern, but when you get tall, it really can overshadow the other houses, literally. It just creates a really different feel. So I'm going, and I do intend to speak at that meeting.
Okay.
And if you want to speak and but you can't go, you can also send a letter.
Yes.
You can send either a letter in support or a protest letter as well. If you need help with any of that, let me know.
Okay.
Or just reach out to Ann Russett too. She is the senior planner and she can help with that. So, yeah, I think it was more, Jordan and Deanna wanted it on the agenda. We want to answer the questions. I don't have all of the answers. They couldn't be here because of the open house. And so, yeah, I mean, if you're interested, please go to the meetings.
They shouldn't schedule their open houses during
I
historic
know.
preservation meetings. All right. Well, I think Margaret needs to leave.
Well, I have missed my ride, so I'm no longer in any time
Oh,
pressure.
no, I'm so
Well,
sorry.
I apologize. I shouldn't have tried to arrange it at that time, so please.
Well, we're going quite long.
So we don't need to formally move G or the staff things, so there's no issue with that.
Okay.
The public got to speak on the item on the agenda, so I think that we have satisfied that.
Great.
So I think that, yeah, you could make a motion and second to adjourn and move on if you'd like. Or I can go over the staff things if you really want to stay here longer.
Let's not. Who would like to make a motion to adjourn?
Thoman motions to adjourn.
Reynolds seconds the motion.
In favor?
Aye. Great, thank you.